Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea DeHaan. I am the Outreach Coordinator for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I welcome you to today's event. Today is the first installment of our pre-law series. You may have attended one of these events in person in the past, and due to COVID, we have brought them online, but that gives us the opportunity to make connections with alumni regardless of where they're located. And I'm very excited about today's guest, who I'm going to be telling you a bit more about in just a moment. I do want to start by saying that while this event is hosted by CHAS, it's open to all students, staff, and faculty. So we welcome students and staff and faculty from across campus. And I'm also pleased to have with me Dan Matthews, who is the CHAS pre-law advisor in my college. Dan will be leading the Q&A later and can introduce himself at that point. I do want to let you know how you can participate in today's event. Obviously, you can see and hopefully hear us. And what you might, though, want to do is let us hear from you. And you can do that using several features here in Zoom. The one that's going to be most important is the Q&A feature. You should see that at the bottom of your screen. If you click that feature, that will allow you to ask questions of our guest or of us as we're talking today. So as the presentation is going on, if you've got any questions or think of anything, don't feel like you have to wait until the end. Feel free to go ahead and start populating that Q&A as questions arise. You can also use the chat feature if you just want to give us a shout out or say hello or let us know that you're listening. Also, if you experience any technical difficulties that you think we'd want to know about and you want to get a message directly to me, you can use the chat feature as well. So those are some features you should know about, and let's get started. So today we are fortunate to have with us an alumni of Utah State University, Ryan Petersen. Ryan holds degrees in both political science and economics from Utah State, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ryan before turning the time over to him. Ryan is currently the Senior Corporate Counsel and Labor Relations Manager for the Idaho National Laboratory. In 2020, Ryan was named Top 100 Under 50 Emerging and Executive Leaders by Diversity MBA magazine. Ryan's accomplishments include the following. He has worked with businesses and unions to negotiate construction contracts for over $5 billion of work. Ryan has negotiated collective bargaining agreements with 24 separate labor unions. From 2012 to 2017, Ryan was the youngest elected prosecutor, district attorney, in Idaho. And he has supervised the litigation of over 10,000 criminal and civil cases. Ryan negotiated the marketing agreement for nearly 25% of the potatoes sold in the United States fresh market. That is a really fun fact. And Ryan has been part of a team of professionals that promote diversity and inclusion in Eastern Idaho. He is a graduate of Washington and Lee University Law School. While there, Ryan was a founding editor of the school's Journal of Energy, Climate, and the Environment. And he graduated magna cum laude with degrees in political science and economics from Utah State University. Upon entering college, Ryan was named a National Hispanic Merit Scholar. In addition to his professional accomplishments, Ryan enjoys running marathons and traveling with his wife and 5 children. He is a strong proponent for Idaho's CSSA program and serves as a volunteer providing legal representation to abused and neglected children. Ryan, we are so pleased to have you with us today, and I'm going to turn the time over to you. So thank you and welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone being here for this, I guess, podcast or whatever you call it. I have a short presentation, so to kind of tell everyone kind of what my thoughts are on this, please feel free to ask any questions you have. My general thoughts were to give a little bit of overview of where I'm at, how I got here, and maybe answer a few questions that have come in before, as far as how do you choose a law school, how do you get through the whole education experience, and then following that, I'd like to speak a little bit about some of my experiences and some of what I do now and what that's like, what it's like to be an attorney and a practicing attorney in the fields where I've practiced. And then maybe go over some of the nuts and bolts in a little bit more detail if we have time. So first, I'm going to share my screen here and go through this PowerPoint. I hope it's working here. Can everyone see that? All right. So, before, when I was thinking of doing this presentation, I was trying to think if I were a biographer of Ryan Petersen, and I was trying to figure out what is it that would encapsulate everything that Ryan's done as an attorney, what would that be? What would the title of that book be? And so I went ahead and, hold on here. And here we go. I think if I had to have a title for my biography, as far as my career, it would be How to Put Lipstick on a Pig. I think so much of my career so far has been negotiating. And for me, a lot of negotiating and a lot of what I do day in, day out is to try to sell people, try to say, hey, this deal, which doesn't look very good, you want to take it. Let me tell you why. And you know, a defense attorney who I really respect, he once said that, you know, he kind of in a little bit defamatory way used to say, all you do is sell lipstick to a pig. And really, I got to say, he was absolutely right. Yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do with unions today. That's what I did when I was a prosecutor trying to sell plea bargains to defense attorneys. That's what I did when I was a potato lawyer trying to figure out how to market the potatoes. A lot of what I do is just negotiating and more negotiating, which involves a significant amount of marketing and trying to rebrand deals to the point to where people want to take those deals. And, you know, like I said, you know, this is a very attractive pig right here, very nice lipstick, and, you know, makes very, 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 very pretty pig. So a little bit about me. You know, I want to go really quickly through kind of my resume stuff because nobody out there really knows who I am. I graduated from Utah State in 2005 with 2 degrees, one in political science and one in economics. You know, at that time, I couldn't make up my mind, and by the end of it, I had 2 degrees. So there's really no reason for 2 degrees other than I just kind of landed that way. You know, after my time at Utah State, I was really seriously thinking about going to business school. I was thinking, well, should I go to law school? Should I go to business school? I ultimately went to, decided I was going to go to law school. And that's kind of where it all started. And you know, I can't really say that I had any real reason why I went to law school versus business school, other than I think school was way more familiar to me than probably trying to go out and, you know, get a job. At that time, I was familiar with school. I liked going to school, and I just continued on. And so after Utah State, I went to Washington and Lee University, which is in Lexington, Virginia. And, you know, those of us that go to Washington and Lee, we're often confused with William and Mary. And, you know, I think that bothers the William and Mary people, not so much us, because, you know, for those of you that don't know, Washington and Lee is kind of like William and Mary. They're both in Virginia. However, Washington and Lee is better ranked, they're better located, and they're better in every single way. So, you know, William and Mary is kind of our rival, but Washington Lee, for everyone out there, is so much better. Totally recommend it. You know, while I was going through school, you know, I had a few major internships and externships, and some of you are probably in that process right now. I did a stint when I was at Utah State with the Utah legislature. I worked with 2 state senators there in Salt Lake. And, you know, I got credit for it. So that was a great experience. That was something I think is totally worthwhile. I know that Utah State has some great programs and internships and externships. Please take advantage of them. I didn't do enough of that when I was in college. And, you know, when I got to law school, I realized that all of the other people in law school had been doing this the whole time. And I felt like, you know, I probably could have done more. But I did do a stint in the legislature, and I'm so glad I did. While I was in law school, I had a couple other internships as well. I interned with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which was a good introduction into government law and whatnot. I also did a internship with the Virginia Farm Worker Legal Assistance Project, where we were really working with migrant workers who were picking tobacco out in the middle of the boonies, really out in places in Virginia that are beautiful, but nobody would ever go there. And so picking tobacco, I got to say, is not the funnest job to have. It's quite dangerous. And we were out there to make sure that there wasn't any kind of just really illegal stuff going on out there. We were looking for human trafficking and different things like that. And so it was a great experience. Did an internship there. And by the way, these internships are available not just to law students, but they're available to everyone. I would strongly recommend you look at those types of internships. While I was in law school, I also was able to kind of have an introduction into what I kind of do now, which is I do a lot of labor and employment law, and I was able to be introduced to labor and employment law through our Virginia Black Lung Clinic. Now, I say Virginia, but we were actually dealing with West Virginia miners. And through this experience, I was able to start representing miners who had black lung disease. And for those of you that don't know, black lung disease is a horrible condition where when you spend a lot of time in the mines, you inhale all of this dust and it basically just destroys your lungs. And so you had 30, 40-year-old miners who really had the lungs of a 100-year-old person. They couldn't even walk out to their mailboxes or whatnot. Several of them died. In fact, one of the miners that I was representing, he actually died while we were trying to get a black lung claim together for him. Very good experience. It was a very good experience in kind of introducing me to both unions. The miners actually had a union at this time, but also to all of the workers' comp and the various other laws that protect workers in the United States. That's basically what I do now, but that was my first introduction to it. A very rewarding experience. And then also I did an externship with our tax assistance clinic. If you like taxes and if you have that inclination, it was great. So that's a little bit of kind of my education background. After I finished law school, I'd really never had a professional job. I mean, I'd worked, while I was in school, and I had some jobs before then, but I had never really had a real job, and I was looking for different opportunities around the country. I got to say, some of my opportunities were there in Washington, D.C. While I was with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a law firm called Jones Day, this is actually their building. I pulled it off the internet. Very good law firm, one of the best in the country. They were wining and dining me, while I was in law school. And at that point, really, I had a choice. Do I do big law, go to a big law firm, practice out there, or do I return to Idaho? One of the things that turned me off about big law was, as I was talking to one of the associates there in Washington, D.C., he was telling me how great it was, and he was whining and dining about, the salary and how they had box seats going to the baseball there in Washington, D.C. And it was a great experience, great people to work with. But then he was telling me about his office, and he had a bed in his office. I remember making the joke, well, boy, that's a great place to work. They'd let you sleep on the job. And he's like, no. Most associates work so many hours here at the job that they actually don't even get a place. They just sleep here, and there's the dry cleaning around the corner, and you can just stay here in your office. Needless to say, that wasn't real appealing to me. I did not want to do that. 2,400 billable in Washington, D.C. basically means you're working a lot of hours. And I'm not afraid of work. I love to work, but that's a little excessive. I don't literally want to live at work. And so made the choice to return to Idaho and never regretted it. Now, I think everybody knows a little bit about Idaho. Idaho doesn't have the big law firms that Washington, D.C. has. There's a lot of different opportunities that Idaho affords. And, you know, one of the big industries in Idaho is potatoes. And that's kind of where I went. You know, these are pictures of a big potato cellar. Those are actually my kids there in front of the cellar. And, you know, a truck hauling potatoes or maybe beets, I'm not sure. But nonetheless, that's where I went and worked with various, you know, entities, mainly doing in-house work. And in-house work in Idaho means you kind of have to be the jack of all trades. A lot of, you know, employment law, of course, but also contracts and various other laws. Really, I did a lot of negotiating. This is where I first started to learn how to negotiate. We negotiated, you know, a lot of fresh potato market. We also, you know, I represent the second largest cooperative in Idaho. So, you know, we were busy, and, you know, not just in you know, the fresh market, but in contract potatoes, you name it, we were very, very busy. This was also where I first started to, you know, work with some unions. Mill workers have a little bit of involvement with the agricultural industry in Idaho. So if you're big enough, you might get on their radar. And so that was the first time I actually worked with some unions, other than the time when I was back in law school working with the miners union back in West Virginia. But that was kind of my first experience working with unions. And I got to say, it wasn't necessarily negative. It worked out pretty well. So sometime after I'd been practicing corporate attorney, doing, you know, potato law, is kind of what I shorthand it for. Some colleagues of mine recruited me to become a prosecutor. And I don't know why I did it. I think I turned them down initially, and I think I turned them down again. And somehow they convinced me to go for it. And so I did. I was the elected prosecuting attorney in the Power County area. My district basically covered everywhere from, I guess, the industrial part of Pocatello, so all of the airport, all that mining area that they have. So a big chunk of Pocatello, nearly all the way up to like Burley, for those of you who know Idaho. But that was my district, and I handled all the cases there. I won my election, and while I was there, just was exposed to a lot of different law. Now, a lot of people think of prosecutor as kind of what you see Law and Order on there, and yes, there is that. I mean, there is, you know, you do a lot of criminal law, but that's not all you do. A lot of my job was actually administering all of the labor and employment issues that come with the county. And so while I did a lot of criminal, I actually did a lot of labor and employment law as well. Anyway, that's one of my old campaign signs. So as prosecutor, some of my accomplishments, won 2 elections. You know, my district there, we had about 2,000 criminal and civil cases a year. So in my 5 years there, we had around 10,000 cases. My main push was to increase child protection and prosecution of crimes involving children, particularly drug crimes involving children. So, you know, drug addicts who have children in the home. That was one of my main focuses as a prosecutor. We were able to increase our prosecution up 300%. I think there's a lot of, Black Lives Matter. It's a big issue right now. I have to say, I'm kind of caught in the middle on this one because I know a lot of really good officers and police and sheriff. I also know that there's some bad eggs out there too. I do wear it as a badge of honor that the bad cops hated me as a prosecutor and campaigned against me. So, and the good ones, they campaigned for me. So, as a prosecutor, you actually have a lot of power to affect the justice system. I remember sometimes seeing some cases that came my way. I remember one particularly. It was a family who I believe they were Mexican, undocumented. They were pulled over, and I really don't know why they were pulled over. The probable cause that the cops gave was that their window tint was too much. They were driving a car that was factory tinted from the factory, so the windows had not been modified in any way. They'd found that the man didn't have a license. He was driving the car, and these are the types of cases I would throw out, because if I could not find a real reason for them to have been stopped in the first place, then it was my job to ensure that we just didn't defend cops doing whatever, that we would throw those types of cases out. And I think for most good prosecutors, that's one of the jobs that the prosecutors have, which is to kind of be a check and balance on the police, which, believe it or not, sometimes creates quite a bit of friction between the prosecutor's office and police. Not always, though, and when it comes to like child protection and protecting children, I think we were all on the same page, and I think those are times when they're high-fiving you, and then when you dismiss their case, they're cursing you. So it's kind of a interesting dynamic there. So after that, I took on a job with the Idaho National Laboratory. At the lab, I became a little bit more focused. So now I'm less of a litigator, and I'm much more of a labor and employment attorney. Now, I've done labor and employment my whole career, but I'm much, much more specialized in labor and employment than I ever was before, and particularly with unions. I work with unions now, and that's my main job, is to negotiate with unions all manner of terms and conditions of employment. I've negotiated with 24 different unions at the lab, and we have a lot of construction out here, and that's a lot of the labor unions here at the lab. And recently we've been awarded contracts of over $5 billion worth of construction. That was my job to go negotiate how the labor component of that was going to be handled. I manage the company litigation, the arbitrations. So if we fire somebody that's from a represented employee, I have to handle that. And any of the grievances that come in from the union of any kind, that's also my job. So, and I'm probably going to go into a little bit more detail as far as the nuts and bolts of what I do, but I kind of wanted to just give you an overview of where we're at here. So, at this time, I have a few questions that were asked me before all of this began, and I kind of just want to answer a few of those, before we move on. So one of the questions I had was, how did you choose the law school that you attended? And now I went to Washington and Lee University, and I guess in answer to that question, Washington and Lee offered me a free application. So I took it. So I applied there. It didn't cost me anything. I just sent them my resume. But in general, I kind of took a different approach. So I was an economics major when I was applying, and I took a statistical approach. Now, when I was a freshman in college, I had a terrible GPA, just terrible. played around too much, skied too much, did not have a good GPA. And so for the last 3 years or 3.5 years of being in college, I had to basically, to even be competitive to go to law school, I couldn't get like less than an A- ever. And so I really, really had to work my way back up because my GPA was so poor. And I was able to do so, but it was hard work. And when you're applying to law school, one thing that people really underestimate is it's 50% of getting into law school is your grades. If you're like me and kind of mess that up in your freshman year, you got to be pretty much perfect to kind of recover from that. But the other half of that is you have to do well in the LSAT. And I've known so many people who had great grades and then they didn't study for the LSAT. I didn't do that. I took a whole 6 months off. I studied for the LSAT and I did very, very well on it. And that's how I did it, get into law school. That's how I went to scholarship on law when I was in law school. And that's how I got into some of the law schools that I got into, is because I had such a great LSAT score. And so many people don't study enough for the LSAT, don't make that mistake. As far as, where I went, I wanted to go to one of the best law schools in the country. It was my goal to go, top 14, go to one of the Ivy Leagues if I could. And, as you know, I didn't go to an Ivy League school, but that was my goal when I was in college. And when it came time and I was applying, I had about a 5%, I figured, chance of getting accepted any of the Ivy League schools. And so it was kind of a numbers game for me. I applied to almost all of them. I applied to Harvard, I applied to Yale, I applied to Columbia, I applied to Pennsylvania. I went down the whole list, Georgetown, clear on down. I got waitlisted at a couple of them, and most of them rejected me. But actually, one of them did finally accept me, and that was the University of Pennsylvania. They accepted me, but I was kind of at the bottom end of really their acceptance level. It was going to cost a lot of money to go there. And in the meantime, Washington and Lee, they offered me a great scholarship to go there. Went and visited the place. It was beautiful. Decided to go there instead. I got to say, a big portion of why I went there was because I thought it was a better place for my family, much more chill than, say, West Philadelphia. When I was visiting the University of Pennsylvania, a quick story here, we were driving around looking for parking, and we went 1 block away from the law school, and we ran into a group of people who were stealing the tires off of a car. They had it up on blocks and they were stealing the wheels right off of the car. This was about 1 block away from the University of Pennsylvania. That wasn't a good environment to take my family to. A lot of the good law schools like University of Chicago, University of Pennsylvania, they are in some terrible neighborhoods. When I was taking a tour of the University of Pennsylvania, they were bragging that there was only 1 murder on campus the year before I went there. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to the University of Pennsylvania or Chicago. I'm just saying there are drawbacks of going there compared to going to a place like Lexington, Virginia. That's ultimately how I made my decision to go there. Some other questions. Let's see here. I think most of these others. How did I choose the area of practice that I work in? Coming to Idaho, I took whatever I could get. That was my first job. Since then, I think I've become more and more specialized, but I really do like labor and employment. If you're going to work in the corporate world, there's kind of 2 tracks you can take, which is contracting. So that's more of the pure procurement side. And then there's labor and employment. And, there's also some in-house counsel that do like intellectual property and various things like that, but they're kind of a different group. But for the most part, if you're going to want to be a corporate counsel, it's pretty much either labor and employment or contract. And between the two, I got to say, labor and employment is much more my speed. I like to negotiate. That's both of them are heavy in negotiations. Contracting is very much negotiation driven, but I like be able to deal with kind of a more varied practice and dealing with HR type issues. You're seeing something different every day. There's just all kinds of crazy things that you see, and employees are always getting fired for who knows what reasons. And it's actually kind of fun to see the different things that happen. And so those are kind of how I landed where I landed. As far as major laws I deal with in my practice, which is another question I have, I deal with labor and employment laws. So the National Labor Relations Act, that's the main one we deal with unions, but we also deal with all of the others. So like Washington, I guess you've got any of the tort stuff. You've got Fair Labor Standards Act. Really any of the stuff that deals with people at work. A lot of anti-harassment laws, workers' compensation. Those are the types of law I deal with on a regular basis, and you get to know them. I mean, you can quote passages out of those after a while. So I think those are some of the questions I have here, but I think some of the other questions I've been given, I think can probably come a little bit later in my presentation. Are there any questions that have come in up to this point?
So Dan, I will turn the time over to you to ask some questions of Ryan. And Ryan, if you're done with your slides, you're welcome to stop sharing your screen, and that way people watching can have a chance to just hear you have a conversation around some of the questions they may have.
So I have some more slides, but
oh, excellent. Well,
these are more directed to kind of like education or anything of that sort.
Okay.
The one that we'd had send in was, what are some of the things you looked at when deciding what law school to attend? And I think you've addressed that pretty well. There's one I have is, what type of other attorneys do you work with, or do you work directly with labor representatives, that sort of thing? And how much interaction do you have with other attorneys throughout the day?
Okay, so in my current position, I work with, generally speaking, I deal with other company attorneys. So there's a general counsel, there's there's one other labor and employment attorney, but she does mainly the employment issues, not so much the labor issues. I work regularly with them on anytime that there's a claim against the company, I'll deal with the opposing attorney. And then very often we hire out other attorneys that I supervise. And so I don't necessarily have the time to handle every single case that comes up personally. And so we actually generally either contract or hire other attorneys to work for our company on various types of litigation. And it's my job to oversee that litigation, make sure they're doing their job, as well as help them out, because they're not as familiar with the company as I am. So I can, it's important that I kind of give them the right story, give them everything they need to be successful, but at the same time, make sure that they're being diligent and doing all of the motions and casework that's necessary for them, so that we can defend ourselves. But for the most part, on the labor side, labor unions sometimes have an attorney, but usually not. I would say 90% of the time, I deal with the union leaders directly. So, sometimes that, it's an electrician who's been elected to be a union president, or whatever the case may be. That's who I deal with most often. And, you know, it's sometimes challenging because they don't always have the same understanding of the law that I do. So it's always helpful when you're dealing with an attorney because you have the same background. But at the same time, there is a challenge when you're working with non-lawyers on lawyerly stuff, because they don't always see things the same way that maybe an attorney would. But for the most part, you know, we work out fine. So. All right, if there's no other questions, I'm going to continue here then. So, you know, I started this out here. What does potato law, criminal law, and corporate law all have in common? And let's go back to the whole putting lipstick on a pig, right? That's kind of my shorthand for what is negotiating. And that is my job. My job is to negotiate day in, day out. And so, you know, what are some of my advices that I give people on negotiations? And I kind of put these in an order, but not really, because I think they're all important to a degree. How do you negotiate? You build on common interests. You have a clear objective. You put yourself in their shoes so that they know, or you know what they're going to ask for. You know what's reasonable and fair, and know your own risk tolerance and your own boundaries. And I'm going to give you a few examples here. So on kind of each of these. So I'm going to hold off on building common interests, but I got to say, there's always a way to build on common interest. And, you know, I think a lot of times everyone thinks, okay, unions, well, what's the common interest that can you possibly have if you represent a union versus the company? And I would say 90% of the time, we agree on the objectives of what we want to accomplish. We want fair wages for the employees. They want fair wages for the employees. You know, we want a safe work environment. They want to work in a safe environment. So I think, you know, a lot of times there's this idea that, you know, you're on opposite sides of the spectrum, that there is no common ground. There's always common ground. And on any negotiation, that's where you start. And, you know, I'm going to kind of go over like some of our negotiation tactics and for example, on wages or something in a minute here to kind of demonstrate how that works. But also have a clear objective. So a while back, I was in a negotiation, and in this negotiation, you know, when we were going into it, we were saying, okay, we need to have the ability to, without using union labor, use a certain amount of our own workforce that was non-union to do these certain tasks, and have the union labor do these other certain tasks. So before we went into negotiations, that was our objective. That's what we wanted to accomplish. Well, we sat down with the unions, and after you know, a few days, we had great success. We got everything we wanted. Everything. It was worked out perfectly. So much so that some of the management that I was negotiating with, they're like, okay, we need to revise what we want. We need to start asking for more. We need to start going for more. And so we did. We asked for a little bit more than what we'd gotten. And we were largely unsuccessful in getting that. Okay, so we absolutely failed on that. And afterwards, I remember talking to this manager, and he thought the negotiation was a failure. And I had to remind him about this, and I said, look, we took the deal because before we went in there, we wanted to accomplish something. We went in there, we got it. All these other things that you wanted, they weren't in the objective anyway. So we won. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is if you don't have an objective, how do you know when you've won your negotiation or not? And the clear answer to that is you don't. If you don't know what you want going in, there's no way to win that negotiation. You're always going to lose. You're always going to lose to whoever knows what they want, because they're going to be able to get what they want and you're not. The other thing is put yourself in the shoes of the union, know what they want. So I generally get several grievances a week. You know, we have a lot of unions, deal with a lot of grievances. You know, recently I got a grievance and it was about, you know, how some non-union person was doing union work using a forklift in a certain area of the lab. And we were looking at this and we're like, why does it matter? It was, you know, this wasn't a big overtime issue. This wasn't a big dollars. You know, everybody else was full working that day. So it wasn't like anybody was sitting at home or anybody lost any kind of time or overtime on this job. And so, you know, we were wondering, why did this grievance come in? And the truth is it didn't have anything to do with that particular thing. It didn't have anything to do with driving the forklift. It didn't have anything to do with overtime. It had everything to do with, they wanted us to hire another forklift driver and they wanted to be able to justify that. So, but without knowing that, you don't really even know what to negotiate, because without knowing their objective, without knowing what they really want, a lot of times the negotiation kind of gets off into the weeds, and there's no way to really successfully solve a negotiation unless you really pinpoint the wants and needs of each party. Now, another thing that's important is know what's reasonable and what's fair. So, you know, I know what's a fair wage. I'm not going to go and try to you know, negotiate people and say, no, we're only going to give you you know, $1 increase, when really they deserve a $5 increase on their wages. Know what's reasonable, know what's what's fair, and then know your own risk tolerance and your boundaries, and stay within that. So I saw a question came in. And the question is, which of your previous jobs helped you gain negotiation experience for your current job? I would say both of them did. Though I would say of the 2 jobs that I had beforehand, I would say probably the biggest help would have been the one where I was a prosecutor. You know, we had 2,000 cases coming in a year. Every single one of them had to be negotiated, and they had to be negotiated quick and dealt with efficiently. And so also, I got to say, it's a little bit easier to negotiate with unions than it is with you know, defendants. And the reason why is there's less on the line. You know, you talk about putting lipstick on a pig. I mean, just think about it. How hard would it be for you to say, yeah, I'm going to go to jail. Yeah, I'm going to plead guilty. I'm going to go to jail, right? That's a hard sell to make to any defendant. And so, you know, as far as a negotiation training, that's pretty good. It's pretty good to have that kind of training of negotiation, because that's really what you're doing as a prosecutor or a defense attorney, is negotiating the best that you can for either the state or for your client on the defendant side. And, you know, coming to the union side, I mean, do unions get kind of tough? Do they get kind of mouthy? Yeah, they do. But you know, when it comes down to it, you're dealing with people who are already well paid. I feel like the companies I've worked for have treated their employees fairly well. And, you know, so it's really more about giving more benefits to people who already have great benefits, which is a little bit easier, I would say, than trying to convince somebody that, oh, by the way, do you want to go to jail for the next 7 years? You know, that's a hard sell. And so of these, I would say being a prosecutor probably provided the most experience in that. So let's see here. I'm trying to return here. So let me give you kind of a negotiation scenario. And by the way, I'll explain this picture here. This is when I was in France. We ran into some union strikes in France, of course. And what this says is Share the riches, not the misery, right? So very, very much union. So negotiation scenario. You represent the company in a wage negotiation. The union represents a group of skilled craftsmen. The union is asking for a raise every year for the next 3 years. Where do you start negotiations? Well, going back to that list I just gave you, what's your common ground? All right, so what are your interests? What's the union interests? Well, the company, believe it or not, companies don't want to like overpay, but they don't, and everybody kind of gets that, right? You don't want to overpay because it's gonna kill the company. But what people don't understand is most companies don't want to underpay either. And that's something that a lot of people who have a lot of mistrust in companies don't really understand is it really hurts when a company underpays because you get the bottom of the barrel. So at like the Idaho National Lab, we work with it's a nuclear facility. We can't afford to have the bottom of the barrel electricians, the bottom of the barrel, pipe fitters. We need the best, right? There's too much on the line. So for us, we recognize, hey, we cannot underpay. That's a bad situation because we'll lose. If we underpay, we're going to lose all of our best people. Can't do that. Also, we have a lot of non-union employees as well. So, we've got a lot to think about here. We've got to treat everybody the same. On the union side, what are their interests? Well, they want fair wages. Now, believe it or not, most unions that I've worked with, they don't want to kill the golden goose. So not only do they want pay, but what's almost more important than pay for a lot of unions is overtime and work. They want to always be at work. They want to have 40 hours a week. They want 50 hours a week. A lot of them want 60 hours a week. Now, that's not every union and that's not every craft, but many, many unions are more worried about losing their work, being replaced by machinery, being replaced in general by non-union employees. And so for them, it's less important sometimes about wages and more important about being competitive and having the company be competitive so they get more work. And also, they don't want to lose, there's just like we want to retain employees, they want to retain employees. And, on the flip side, they know that there's non-union employees out there. They want to get the same deals that the non-union guys get as well. So where do you start? Here's kind of the scenario. Where do you start on all of this? Well, you find the common ground, and that's how I would start a negotiation is I would work with the union and come out with a mutual interest statement. What are our common ground? Both sides agree that wages should be sufficient to retain valued employees, right? That wages should not be so far out of market that the financial competitiveness of the company suffers, right? They don't want that either. And both sides agree that there should be some level of fair wages. So, if I'm starting with the union and this is our common interest, pretty soon I'll say, well, how do we do this? And they'll ask me, well, how do we do this? And, my experience is a lot of times we end up with kind of the same solutions, which are, all right, let's pay a fair market value then. Okay, we're not gonna ask for something crazy out in left field. We're not going to pay them way under market or anything. Let's do a market analysis. Let's find out what the market is. And we'll both agree that's going to be the basis of our asks. And in every union contract that I've worked so far, that has been how we worked our contract, and we've been able to seal the deal. And what that really does is instead of each side starting out at, oh yeah, I want a 100% raise or I want a 0% raise, we start out right where we should be. And yeah, I mean, we still have disagreements, we still go, but we're not disagreeing to the fundamental aspects of what we're negotiating. And I would say that, while this is how we do finances, it's also how we do grievances. It's how we deal with any kind of problem that we deal with on a daily basis with unions. I'm kind of running low on time. I had some scenarios. It's the same thing for a prosecutor, by the way. If you're a prosecutor, you want justice, you want to protect, and if you're on the defense side, let's say you're defending some meth head or something, there's ways to represent them too. And believe it or not, defense attorneys and prosecutors have a lot of common ground. Both sides usually agree on 90% of what needs to happen, which is a lot of these guys need to get substance abuse or supervision or some way so that they can improve their life. And it's not all about let's take it to them, or it's not all about let's get them out of jail and have no consequences. A lot of it's about let's tailor the consequences to get the best outcome. So labor relations. Maybe you guys want to be in labor relations. Let me tell you why. Labor relations is great. So if you choose to go into labor relations, let me tell you, pay is great. And you don't actually need to be a lawyer to go into labor relations. In fact, I work with about 4 different labor relations specialists right now. None of them have more than a college degree, and the standard wage for a labor relations specialist is around $100,000 a year. So it's not a bad place to go. And the attorneys, it just goes up from there. There's very, very high demand for attorneys in labor relations. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I get probably a job offer about once a week on average from somebody looking for a labor relations manager. There are just not that many of us out there. You get to work with HR, so there's all kinds of cool stories that you get to deal with on a daily basis of just interesting stuff, right? And who doesn't like to see cool stuff when they're at work? And I got to say, what is labor relations in a nutshell? What we do is we combat fear. Unions exist when fear exists. They don't exist when fear does not exist. So when our managers and our leadership is doing everything right, and they're responsive, and their employee relationship skills are so high that every employee that we have feels valued and they love to come to work, unions can't exist in that environment. They just can't. But when we don't do our job, when we have bad managers who are doing bad things, right? Harassing their employees, yelling at them, making them do stuff that's outside their job scope, that's when unions start to have a lot of traction. And so what would I say my main job is? It's to help employees. It's to help the day-to-day life of employees and combat fear in the workplace. It's to make things better. A lot of my job is employee relations, and it's just trying to make people feel valued in what they do every day. Very good. It's very rewarding. What are some of the negatives? It's adversarial. You're dealing with unions, so they sometimes they'll yell at you, and you got to have a thick skin sometimes. You got to work well with others. In general, sometimes you need to be a John Wayne. Sometimes you can be their best friend, but one way or another, you have to figure out a way to work with others. There's not a lot of labor relations in this side of the country. So, I mean, it's a great job. Some places of the country, labor relations is huge. Other parts, it's kind of hard. So, in Idaho and kind of this area, there's a few unionized workforces. You kind of have to target those specifically because it's not going to be everywhere. That's kind of where we're at right now. Looking at the clock here, I see that I have 5 minutes, and I really don't want to end this without having some question and answer. So I'm going to go ahead and end my presentation here. But I got to say, I love my job. I love what I do. It's very, very rewarding. And whether you work on the union side or the labor or the company side, there's just a lot to offer in labor relations and working for companies. So I'm going to leave it to questions from here on out.
Okay. Thank you. That was great. I have one question, and please, if you're in the audience, please post them on the question and answer queue there, and we'll be happy to take them. What skills that you learned in college and law school helped you most in your job now? Do you find yourself doing a lot of reading? Do you find yourself doing a lot of writing? Which skills do you draw on most often?
I think writing is always important. I think writing is probably the most important skill you learn in college, or one of them. I think part of it is thinking too. What I like about, you know, humanities and some of those, you know, particularly, is I think it's very important to keep an open mind. You can't really see. One of the things I pointed out earlier was it's important to be able to put yourself in the other side's shoes if you're going to be an effective negotiator. And what that means is you can't be too rigid in your thought patterns. You've got to be able to see the other side to, you know, any kind of problem. You know, for me, if I can't argue the union side better than they can, that's a problem. You know, I need to know their case better than they do. And then I need to know my side as well, you know, and so in that sense, the best way I can to communicate and to negotiate is if I can put myself in their shoes and really use that to my advantage. That's, I think, a skill that you learn generally, particularly in the humanities and college, but you know, also something that a good lawyer ought to have that skill as well. If you think that you're right and only you can be right, that's going to really handicap you as an attorney and in this role.
Excellent. We've had two come in. What are your study tips for the LSAT?
Take 6 months off, take a Kaplan or one of those other courses, and take every practice test you can. One thing that really helped me when I was at Utah State is there were a couple professors. I'm trying to remember their names. Was it Sherlock or
Yeah,
I can't
Sherlock,
remember.
Dr. Sherlock.
That had a logic class that
Yeah.
was really, really good. Take a logic class, learn just logic in general. One warning, I think they warned me, and I think it's probably true. If you do have a significant other, just remember that logic class very well may make you a very hard person to live with for a while. And do not let logic interfere with your relationships with others.
We have another one. What classes, when completing your undergraduate degree, did you find most helpful to refer back to while in law school?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
This is, yeah, what classes while completing your undergraduate degree did you find most helpful to refer back to while in law school?
Okay, so that goes back to writing. And this is something that most people don't realize when they're going to law school is there are no and there's no like multiple choice tests in law school. It's all essays. And if you want to do well in law school, the best people who did well, like all the people on law review, the people that were top of the class, wasn't necessarily the smartest people. It wasn't necessarily the guys that multiple choice the best or did the best on the LSAT. It was like journalism majors and English majors and other people who did tons and tons of writing while they were in undergrad. And I think humanities is great for that as well. I think I probably got a little bit less of that when I was doing my economics component. But I would strongly recommend that you take as many writing classes as you can because that's who did the best in law school. It was people who could write because that's how you were tested. And it has nothing to do with how much you know because by the time you get to law school, everybody's fairly smart. But not everybody can write a good essay.
Good. We had one more. What ways did you find best to study for the LSAT? So just repetition, or what? How did you get those scores to climb?
So I think, the logic classes were really key. I mentioned that before, but it's one thing to read like an LSAT book or anything. It's another thing to take a deeper dive into kind of the fundamentals of logic. If you want to really improve your scores, take the time to really get to the bottom of logic. Other than that, some of those games and the different things that you have to do, a lot of that's practice. You kind of, some of it is kind of the tricks of the tests, so you kind of have to get used to the tricks. So if you're getting stumped, not because you don't know the stuff, but because like the question is, asked funny, do enough practice tests to the point to where those don't trick you anymore. And that is something that you can do. But I can't say this enough. 50% of going into law school is your LSAT. It is as important or more important than your grades. Don't skimp it. Take 6 months off, take whatever time you need. Don't even bother thinking of law school until you're ready to take that test. And if you do, the sky's the limit for you. I mean, coming from Utah State's very well respected. You can get into Harvard, you can get anywhere from Utah State if you have a good GPA and you have a good LSAT score. And if you have a great LSAT score, you can be like me. Maybe you don't want to go Ivy League, but then take a scholarship. I mean, it's so expensive to go to law school anyway. A scholarship really helps.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It looks like that's all our questions. Andrea, do you have questions?
I think you answered my question already, Ryan, and I think you've done a wonderful job helping to distill for us, the ins and outs of labor negotiation and, how you're working in those areas and representing a company. So thank you for breaking that down so nicely and allowing us to understand a little bit more about what it is you do and why that might be attractive or interesting to students who are looking to find their niche eventually in law. So thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, and if anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm sure that Andrea or Dan has my contact info. Please, I can answer any questions later as well. So